more like moderate, I'd say, paper. Would you say that?
Oh, I would say that they're a pretty straight ahead news source.
Yeah. Okay. Good. This is their editorial. Trump must go.
Oh, I don't think that's a radical position after yesterday. I mean,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
I anybody who isn't thinking that or seriously considering that, I don't know what to say to you. I mean, I don't. This is what happened yesterday is complete insanity, of course. And if you want to have a revolution, gosh, I sound like the Beatles. If you want,
That's right.
you say you want a revolution. Well, don't tear up the Capitol. Do something else. The Capitol has too much meaning to all of us out here in the corn. So be cool. Be cool. Anyway, David, it's great to have David back. Of course, he was with the Iowa Policy Project, a co-founder of the Iowa Policy Project for many, many years. That group has been renamed Common Good Iowa, as I recall. Is that right?
You recall correctly.
I looked it up this morning just to make sure, because I've been off work a long time. And I'm glad to be back and glad to be talking with David. But David has, and this has special meaning for me, he has an editorial in the Cedar Rapids Gazette, the moderate mainstream Cedar Rapids Gazette. And it concerns the nuclear power plant in Palo, Iowa, which is just north of Cedar Rapids, about 15 miles. And they are closing the Palo plant. And that's has a special meaning to me since my son has worked there for 11 or 12 years and planned to keep working there until the age of 55. Well, he's not 55, and they're not keeping the plant open. And I know I talked to the representative, the state senator in that area, Dan, what is his name? Dan?
Zumba.
Thank you, Zumba. Dan Zumba is a pretty good guy. You might not think so because he's a big ag guy. But Zumba said he was doing what he could to keep the plant open. And he pointed a finger at who do you think as the reason the Duane Arnold plant was closing down. That's right, green people.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Green people. And you can't see David Osterberg, but he's green. He's green. He's a greenie. Now,
Guilty, green.
Is that what happened, David, or what's the rest of the story?
The rest of the story. Well, first of all, this is a story that came out, and it's true. We had this derecho. I think you were on the edge of it, you guys.
Yeah.
But boy, it slammed into Cedar Rapids.
Oh yeah, tree fell on my son's house. It was a total mess.
Oh, it was awful, and it knocked out the cooling system for Duane Arnold.
Oh.
So the interesting thing is that here it is, climate change probably had something to do with that derecho because it's not things that we're used to having, and a warmer atmosphere means we're getting that kind of extreme weather.
Right.
But here it is, the climate change knocks out something that kind of benefits climate change. If we were going to produce electric power, we ought to produce it first with wind or solar, and then with nuclear power, not with coal. So here it is. Climate change knocks out Duane Arnold. But it didn't, because Duane Arnold was going down 2 months from the time it got hit.
Now explain that, going down 2 months for the time. What do you mean by that?
Well, they had a contract. You see, it's what's called a merchant plant. It's owned by this Florida company that owns a lot of wind power around the state.
Yeah.
Nexera owns it, and they had a contract with Alliant. And Alliant was buying the power, but Alliant didn't own the plant anymore. It was a different company.
Mm-hmm.
So Alliant goes to the company and says, we're paying so much for the power that you're producing. We'd like to make a deal. We'll just give you $110 million and we get out of our contract. And that happened because wind power is so cheap in Iowa that Duane Arnold couldn't compete.
Well, I suppose that's the case. I mean, Iowa's number 3 in wind power potential.
We are, yeah.
After Texas and Montana or something?
No, we're number 2.
We're number 2.
Texas. Yeah, we're number 2.
After Texas?
And we're close. I mean, Kansas and Iowa, Oklahoma, those are the states that are kind of nip and tuck. Yeah, Texas way in the lead. But yeah, we have the highest percentage In 2019, 42% of all the electricity generated in Iowa was from wind turbines. You know, clearly we're good in wind. Clearly
Sure.
it's very cheap here. Duane Arnold being a merchant plant, so you couldn't just put the costs onto the ratepayers willy-nilly. They had to compete then straight out with cheap natural gas or with wind, and they couldn't do it. That's why they were going to be, go down 5 years early. They had a contract for another 5 years.
But they bought their way out of it.
They bought their way out of that contract. But this is what happened, Mike, in other states. In New Jersey, New York, Ohio, and Illinois, a neighboring Illinois, they kind of made deals and said, we'd rather have nuclear power produce kilowatt hours than we would a coal plant, because coal plants cause that climate change to come on faster. So we don't think that a coal plant in Sioux City is the same as a nuclear plant in Cedar Rapids. The Cedar Rapids plant is better. It's more expensive, but we're going to figure out a way to keep that one open because it's good for the environment. That was the deal that was made in those other states, except we wouldn't make that deal. And that was Zumbaugh was trying, I think, to make that deal.
Right.
He didn't do it. And
he didn't get it done.
He didn't get it done.
What was the reason if it was such a good deal?
Well, they never came to the unions and really said, look, you guys have an awful lot of good jobs here, like 500.
Yeah.
They didn't come to the environmental community and say, let's make a deal. Here's my deal. My deal is, okay, you're still going to close Duane Arnold in 5 years, but it's 615 megawatts. So every year you bring on 120 megawatts of new solar or wind. And then by the time that happens, we got the replacement in those kilowatt hours from sources that don't cause carbon dioxide to go into the atmosphere. You got them replaced. That keeps Duane Arnold going another 5 years and keeps your kid in a job for another 5 years.
Has that been done?
No.
Oh.
They could have done it. They did that exactly in Illinois, and that was the deal they made. The deal said you keep, and two of the plants, they kept 3 reactors going. A 2-reactor plant on the Mississippi River is just on the border of Iowa. That's called the Quad City plant. They kept the Quad Cities going for, I think, about another 10 years. 600 good jobs, good union jobs because of that. And then they agreed to do a whole lot of more solar to replace those kilowatt hours eventually. Yeah, they could have made that deal. I would have made that deal.
Yeah.
So, and I'm green. Let's get back to this. I'm green.
I know you are.
I don't like trying to build a new nuclear power plant because the things just cost way too much money. They're never come on remotely on time, and they're always 2 or 3 times more than they said they were going to cost. New nuclear power plants are dumb. Keeping the old ones going, not dumb at all.
But they're not paying attention to David Osterberg once again.
They are not. They didn't want to pay. In fact, I talked with a former guy, somebody who chaired the Iowa Utilities Board, and we talked for a while about what are the chances, and he said nobody seems to be interested. Nobody seems to be interested.
What are they interested in if they're not interested in all these jobs in Cedar Rapids? I mean,
well, they got $110 million, and NextEra was happy, and Alliant was happy.
How about the state of Iowa? Were they involved?
Exactly. That's why I don't know why Zumbaugh, who is a pretty powerful senator, didn't have more to say about this. And I don't know why it happened. Now listen, the deal that was made in Illinois was a very good deal. Most of the environmental community was on that. They said this, let's go forward on this. In Ohio, they did quite the opposite. They made things much worse trying to keep those nukes going. And in fact, it's so hard to pass a piece of legislation like this because it increases somebody's electric bill and they get annoyed.
They get really annoyed.
And so in Ohio, the Speaker of the House took a bribe. $60 million. A guy named Householder got. He's under indictment. The company's under indictment. Clearly, that is one way of doing it.
That is one way.
The wrong way of doing it. Okay?
I might have gone for that deal myself. $60 million.
$60 million. Yeah. And so that's still going on. That fight is, and people, your listeners can look that up. Just go Google Householder or Ohio or House Bill 6 Ohio, and boy, there's a lot going on there. They still haven't repealed that bill, by the way. But right now, people are real mad. I mean, it was clear bribery. Now, that didn't have to happen that way. If you would say, look, we're all in this together. We have some good jobs. We can do something about climate change, which is going to be good for our weather and our flooding and everything else. Let's go forward, and you can make that deal. I mean, most environmentalists aren't, in love with nuclear power. That's probably right. And when Zumbaugh said that, he's correct. But what kind of a deal do you want to make? 5 more years of Dwayne Arnold in exchange for a whole lot of solar? I'd make that deal.
I would make that deal. I see Larry Householder, though, out in Ohio, is in a little bit of trouble. I mean, he's a Republican.
He is a Republican.
But he had Democratic sponsors, so everybody was in on this. But it looks like Larry and a couple other guys were getting the money.
Yeah, they were.
And Larry was probably trying to figure out a way to screw them out of theirs.
Yeah, I think he's a piece of work. But,
yeah.
But anyway, whether or not the bribes were given and whether or not it was a good idea for New York State to do something similar, you can see why this would work. You know, if climate change is a reality, and usually when you and I talk, we get back to that. It's a reality. Closing one of those Neil plants up in Sioux City ought to happen.
They have
keeping Dwayne Arnold open ought to happen too.
They have a new nuclear power plant in Sioux City. Is that what you said?
No, it's a coal plant.
Coal plant.
Yeah, coal. It's Neil 3 or 4, maybe 3 and 4. But it's a very old plant. It's a pretty polluting plant.
Right.
So if you live around it, your air is not going to be very good to breathe, and it's going to cause climate change. Get rid of that plant. Keep Dwayne Arnold.
Well, that's that's a regional thing. Now, yesterday I talked with Steve King, former Congressman Steve King. And he's got a book coming out that you and I should both read.
I bet we should.
Yeah, he hasn't found a publisher yet, but he will. I'll put him onto Encounter Books, which is a pretty conservative publishing house, and he'll have that book out probably by the spring. But I assume Steve King and others in the Sioux City area probably kept that coal plant going.
Yeah, well, they probably would, when I just say offhand, we get rid of this and do that. But the point is, it's not picking cities that I like. It is picking something that is good for our economy and good also for the environment. And that's where I generally go. That's why I come out with biofuels. Biofuels, good for our economy, okay for the environment.
Well,
better than gas.
I'm surprised to hear David Osterberg, of all people, advocating for nuclear power.
No, well, I'm not. Again, let's say nuclear power plants. In fact, what I wrote, the blog I wrote, and the op-ed in the Gazette were based on a paper I did. I mean, I worked about 4 months writing a 10-page paper. 8 pages and 40 references. Where I talk about new nuclear power plants and conclude that it's a very bad idea. But already existing plants that are in trouble right now, and we have almost 100 nukes in nuclear reactors in the United States, and about 25 are in trouble, like Dwayne Arnold. Keep them going a little longer, replace them with solar, and it's going to be good for the world, good for the United States, good for union jobs.
You've been talking wind power for a long, long time, and you tell us that 42% of the power in Iowa comes from wind power. Is that correct?
That was last year's number, yeah.
That was last year's number. We expect that number to increase, I suppose, this year.
Probably.
Yeah. So right now, our sources of energy are coal,
right,
and wind power.
Yes.
And we don't get a lot from nuclear power, I guess, since Duane Arnold was the only nuclear plant in the state of Iowa.
That's right. It was about 9 or 10%.
9 or 10%, probably over there in eastern Iowa, no doubt. And what is the primary source of energy in the state of Iowa then?
It's wind, first and coal number 2.
Coal.
Again, that's 1919 numbers. We don't have the 20 numbers yet.
You mean 2019?
I mean 2019. Did I say 1919?
Yes, you did, which was probably a while back. I think coal was winning back then.
Oh, I think it was the other pandemic I was talking about, right?
The Spanish flu thing. I think that's what you were talking about. Yeah, I suppose the number one source of energy back then could have been lumber.
That's right.
People cutting down trees. And as I recall, my grandparents used coal. Of course, they were living quite a bit differently than we do. But anyway, David Osterberg is our guest. He's with Common Good Iowa. And David's going to be with us just a little bit longer today because I think this is the subject worth talking about. So, David, come back about 2:40, would you please?
I will do that, Mike.
Thank you, sir. This is AM 1400 KVFD.
Michael Devine, the Doctor of Truth.
Does anyone have anything they'd like to confess?
That AM 1400 KVFD.
Ready to create your own income with your own home-based business where there's no such thing as getting laid off? If a billionaire entrepreneur